The birth of illegal immigration. Welcome, curious viewers. Today we're going to examine the origins of the concept of illegal immigration in America. This topic has become highly controversial and politicized in recent years, but there was a time not too long ago when it wasn't possible to immigrate illegally to the United States at all. Stick around as we delve into the fascinating history behind this issue. There was no such thing as illegal or legal immigration to the United States until the late 19th century. This is due to the fact that there must be a law for you to break in order for you to immigrate illegally. After the United States gained independence in the late 1700s, immigration to the country truly started. Prior to it, European immigrants had arrived in the Americas and Africans had been brought there against their will as slaves. The academicians Eve Tuck and K. Wayne Yang argue that whereas immigrants are subject to the rules of the country they migrate to, settlers arrive with the intention of upending the status quo and enacting their own laws. However, immigrants poured into the United States with little restrictions after the country's constitution became the new national legislation. This does not imply that the New World accepted them. At the beginning, there was a strong anti-Irish and anti-Catholic sentiment, as immigrants hailed primarily from Northern and Western Europe. As immigrants from China and Southern and Eastern Europe began to arrive in the mid to late 19th century, Americans became resentful of the increase in Catholicism and the number of Chinese and Italians. While municipal immigration laws were passed in several states during this period, such as California, Madeline E. Hsu, a history professor at the University of Texas at Austin, notes that these laws were either not well enforced or overturned by courts. Actually, before the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, there were no federal laws dictating who was allowed entry and who was not. Chinese laborers were employed at the period in factories, railroads, agriculture, and gold mines, particularly on the West Coast. White Americans blamed these immigrants for poor wages and other economic issues, despite the fact that they made up only 0.002% of the U.S. population. The Exclusion Act prohibited nearly all immigration from China, with the exception of a small number of special groups like diplomats and students, in order to allay racial and economic fears. Furthermore, the same year saw the passage of the Immigration Act, which prohibited entry into the nation for anyone who were impoverished, mentally ill, or convicted of crimes. The acting presumption was that if you're Chinese you must have come in illegally, according to Hsu, because only a very limited group of Chinese individuals could lawfully immigrate. Certificates of residence, which are meant to show, to document, that they have in fact entered legally, are now only required of Chinese people. The Asiatic Barred Zone Act of 1917 outlawed most immigration from Asia along with that of prostitutes, polygamists, anarchists, and those afflicted with communicable illnesses. With the passage of the 1924 Immigration Act, which prohibited anyone who was not eligible to obtain naturalization under the terms of the 1790 Naturalization Act, Asian exclusion persisted. It was initially stated in that naturalization statute that only free white individuals could apply to become citizens. However, by 1924, formerly marginalized groups such as Native Americans, Mexicans, and Black Americans had achieved citizenship rights, and the law essentially primarily affected Asians. But the introduction of numerical restrictions or quotas based on country of origin was the most significant alteration to immigration policy established by the 1924 statute. People from Northern and Western Europe were greatly given preference over those from Southern and Eastern regions of the continent by these quotas. Since most immigrants came from Europe, Hsu claims that the earlier restrictions on Asian immigration had very little impact on the growing levels of immigration to the United States. The sense of crisis that America was taking in too many immigrants, especially non-Anglo-Saxon ones, was intended to be addressed by these new quotas. When U.S. Attorney General Jeff Sessions declared in September 2017 that the country would terminate DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, a program that allowed individuals who entered the country as undocumented youngsters to remain, the 1924 legislation once again made headlines. The 1924 Immigration Act, according to Sessions, was good for America. However, the 1924 Act is considered almost universally to be a stain on our history, according to May M. Ngai, a professor of Asian American Studies and History at Columbia University. Based on their race and country of origin, it ranked people from all over the world on a kind of hierarchy of desirability, the woman claims. That is not a contentious issue. Up until the 1960s, when a new law established a new system, the 1924 quota system was essentially still in effect. There is a limit on the overall number of visas that the United States can grant annually. U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services states that no country may get more than 7% of all visas authorized for issuance by the United States. There had been no numerical restrictions on immigration within the Americas prior to this modification in 1965. Therefore, it was the first time that the United States had formally placed a limit on immigration from Mexico when it decided that it would only accept a particular proportion of individuals from each country each year. Before this, immigrants from Mexico were able to find employment in the U.S. freely and often. However, Jane Hong, an Occidental College history professor, writes in the LA Times that whole groups of migrants from Mexico and Latin America whose entrance to the U.S. would have been considered legal before 1965 suddenly became illegal after the Hart-Celler Immigration Act was passed. A lot of talk about the DACA students and claims that the program is illegal, Shu states. She goes on, the issue with that is that laws can always be changed. Laws are modified on a regular basis to reflect changing circumstances. And that brings us to the end of this video on the origins of illegal immigration in America. I hope you found it eye-opening and learned something new. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe if you want to see more content like this.